there seemed to be a kind of a recurring theme coming up, which was all about people getting fixated on results and having that need to produce a result get in the way of the thing that's actually going to produce a result, which is the process itself. It's very easy for us to fall in love with events. What I mean by events, who doesn't love events? An event could be anything from an opening night, a premiere, an awards show, to the kind of events that take place even within our work, like getting emotional in the scene, or having the scene look a particular way, the event of the scene. And the more we get fixated on the event itself, we actually pull ourselves out of the very thing that is going to get us to the event. There is no event without process. We live in a world where we are constantly exposed to events. And if you watch like the Oscars, for example, I don't know an actor out there who hasn't thought, I want that. I want that for me. What we often forget is that behind that event, behind that person winning that award or walking down that red carpet, has usually been years and years and years of work to get them to that place. The reason why this school is called Acting Mastery is because mastery is not a destination. Mastery is all about process. The better we get at the process of acting, the more we will produce results. Master the process and the results will come. Does that make sense? That if you just get good at the process of acting, if you get good at the process of putting down tapes, if you get good at the process of auditioning, you will begin to produce results. But what I keep seeing happen with a lot of particularly beginner actors is that they'll put down one tape and expect something to happen out of it. Like they'll have this big kind of expectation of, first of all, how the tape should look, and if it doesn't look that way, then they start to beat themselves up. They start to diminish themselves. They start to question whether or not they should even be an actor. A lot of the time, there's this pressure there's a pressure that they either put on themselves or that other people are putting on them to get their tapes right, either so they can get an agent or so that they have work that they can send to casting directors to get them in the door, to get them auditions. But the more pressure they put on themselves, the worse their work becomes. And I was saying to someone today, it's a little bit like going to the gym one time and then coming home and looking in the mirror and expecting to see abs and your abs aren't there. And because your abs aren't there, you just think, well, what's the point? I might as well just give up now. I'm not going to go back. Would that seem ridiculous? That if, like, to go to the gym one time and expect to see your abdominals, or to expect to see like these brand new, big biceps? What's realistic and what will happen is if you go to the gym consistently, one day you will look in the mirror and go, oh my God, what's that? Are those abs? Is that a six-pack? Holy cow, look at that. All of a sudden, it just begins to happen. All of a sudden, the results actually become obvious. The results are there for all to see. What I keep seeing happening is actors, going to one class, putting down a couple of tapes and immediately expecting their work to be at this really high level. That's just not how it works at anything. Imagine, playing the piano once and then expecting that you could just do a piano concerto or join a symphony orchestra. It takes work. It takes a lot of work to get your work to a level that will have you be paid for it, that will have people really sit up and pay attention. And that's okay, because there is so much expectation on producing a result. A lot of actors are beginning to fall out of love with acting because it's not fun every time they put down a tape and it doesn't live up to that ideal or that standard that they have in their head about how it should look. Now, we've talked about standards and ideals before, right? And what happens when we have a particular standard or ideal, the standard is here and maybe your work is there. Standards are used as a basis for comparison. So just know when you've got some standard in your mind about how something should look, you're automatically going to be in the process of comparing yourself to the standard. And what happens when we don't live up to the standard? What do? We diminish ourselves. We diminish the work. We diminish the process. We diminish other people. We diminish the world around us. We diminish the industry. Does that make sense? So standards and ideals, there's nothing wrong with them. They are useful sometimes. But I want you guys to just know that as long as there's a standard or an ideal present, it'll never be good enough. The work will never be good enough. And it's a kind of a surefire way of putting so much pressure on yourself that it no longer becomes enjoyable to do the thing that you want to do. I mean, you all got into acting because it was fun, right? Because there was something about it that you love. Right now, I get that they've got tapes that they want to get down that maybe their agents are asking for, or they're trying to get tapes down so that they can get an agent. I was encouraging them to make their goal for the next few months, not to get that tape right, but just to fall back in love with acting. To just fall back in love with the process. Know that every time you put down a tape, or every time you come to class, or every time you work on a monologue, or any time you're learning lines, you are making progress. You are working on your craft. You are getting better at what you do. You are showing up. There's a really good analogy that I heard David Mamet say. I was lucky enough to study with David Mamet many years ago. And he talks about the buffalo dance. What is the buffalo dance? The buffalo dance is the dance that Native Americans would do in order to bring the buffalo, to get the buffalo to come, so that they would have something to hunt and something to eat. And the idea is that every day they would get up and they would do the dance. And what do you do when the buffalo don't come? Well, you get up and you do the dance again. And you just keep doing the dance, day in, day out, until guess what? One day, the buffalo come, and the dance worked. And what do you do the next day when the buffalo don't come? You get up and you do the dance again. And I think in a way, just showing up to class is kind of like doing the buffalo dance. Putting down a tape is like doing the buffalo dance. You are working your process. There's a really great book called Mastery by George Leonard. George Leonard was an Aikido master, and he talks about how the process of learning is not linear. There are kind of peaks and valleys, and often you're going to find yourself on the plateau. that what will happen is you'll be here, and then you'll have a breakthrough, and suddenly you go to there, and then all of a sudden you're just on the plateau for a while. And it doesn't seem like you're making any progress. And then there'll be some other kind of breakthrough. Or maybe this can also happen, you learn something new, and all of a sudden you get a little bit worse because you're having to integrate the new lesson. You're having to integrate the thing that you've learned. So you get a little bit worse, and then once you've integrated it, all of a sudden you go to the next level. And then guess what? You're back on the plateau for a while. What he talks about in this book on mastery is the need to fall in love with the plateau, to not be so attached to every breakthrough. Because sometimes it takes a while for those breakthroughs to come. Sometimes you need to hear the same thing said again and again, or said a little bit differently for it to suddenly click. So just know that there's nothing wrong with the plateau. And even if it doesn't feel like you're making progress, you are still in the process. You are still in the process. You are in the process of mastery. What he talked about was like how he began to just love showing up to the dojo and going through the motions of putting on his uniform and getting up and practicing his warm-up and then practicing his moves. And in a sense, I think, when you guys come here, it's a little bit like coming to the dojo. You're here to practice. You're here to try stuff. You're here to implement what you've already learned and to get better at it. And know that every actor that you see out there at an event, on a red carpet, winning an award, that the reason that they are at that event is because there has been years, in some cases decades, of work that has gone in to getting them to that place. I remember when Judi Dench was nominated, I think, for her first Oscar, somebody on the red carpet asked her what it was like to be this overnight success. Judi Dench, in her, I think at the time, probably her late 50s, early 60s. She was nominated for a film called Her Majesty Mrs. Brown. And I think she said to this interviewer who said, "What's it like to be this overnight success?" She was like, "Overnight success? I've been doing this for 40 years, or 50 years, or whatever it had been." But that's how long it had taken her to get to the Oscars. Should that diminish her career? Does that take away from all of the incredible work that she'd done beforehand? Absolutely not. We've got to kind of stop looking for that external validation sometimes. Not only validate ourselves, but do it because we love to do it. We don't know when our time's up. We don't know whether or not we'll make it, quote unquote, make it. We just don't know what the future has in store for us. So if you feel like it would be a waste of your time to do this work and not get that validation, then don't do this work. Do something else, because it is hard. It does take something. But if it would be worth it anyway, because it's what you love to do, because it lights you up and it enlivens you, then that's a really good reason to do it. And that's a really good reason to keep doing it. And I'm not saying you can't want those things, that you don't, that there's nothing wrong with wanting all of the rewards. There's nothing wrong with wanting those things. But first and foremost, do it because you love to do it. When you might find that when you do fall in love with acting, and you are doing it for the love of doing it, and you're taking that pressure off of yourself, and you're taking that pressure off of trying to get it right, that's when people start producing results. And that's when people start booking jobs. Because they're not trying to please anybody else anymore. Do you know what I mean? They're just trying to please themselves. Really, their goal is just to have fun. And I guarantee you, when actors are having fun, the audience have fun. There's a kind of an attitude that you begin to see in their work of like, I don't care. I just don't care what you think. It's not about what you think. It's about pleasing myself. Those kinds of actors that are about like doing work that pleases themselves, those actors are really magnetic to watch. They're really exciting to watch. I want you to find in your work a sense of mischievousness. I want you to get mischievous with it and a little bit irresponsible in a good way. Not in any kind of weird, dangerous way. Like this isn't about like, making other people uncomfortable or anything like that. But this is about getting playful. When there's a sense of mischievousness in the work, even when it's a really dramatic scene, there's an aliveness that you see in the actor. There's fun. There's a sense of possibility. There's a sense that I don't quite know where this scene is going to go. It could go in any direction right now. And there's also what I see when actors are being a bit mischievous is I start to get a clearer sense of who they are. They start to shine through because they're not ironing themselves out trying to get it right. Does that make sense? I keep seeing actors do that all the time. Because they're trying to get it right, they end up ironing themselves out. They start to flatten themselves down. And then I'm not actually really able to get a sense of you in the work. But when you're being playful and a bit mischievous, I start to see who you really are. And that's what will have you stand out. Not ironing yourself out to conform and to get the scene right according to the writer or the director or some expectation that you have in your mind about what casting is looking for. But it's you taking ownership of the scene. You making it yours. That's what has you stand out. As actors, we are always at a disadvantage because the buyer always knows more than the seller, right? Like casting always have more information about the role than you do. And so we are constantly trying to guess what they want or what they're looking for. And the reality is, even if you've read the script, even if you get a character breakdown, you'll never know exactly what's in their head or exactly what they were planning unless you're able to have a conversation with them, which usually you're not. So you might as well swing for the fences. You might as well take some risks because often they don't really know. We think that they know, but they often don't know exactly what they're looking for. Not until they see it. And sometimes if you really do the work and you're interested in the process and you've really thought about who this character is, you might start to pick up some insights that are there in the script because you've put your detective hat on and you've really started to think about, well, who is this person? What's my take on them? How do I relate? And as you begin to do that, all of a sudden you might begin to make us think that you know more about the character than we do. That you've got this insight into who the character is that may not be on the page. What if you could make casting think that you know more about this character than they do? That you've got just that little bit of insight or that take that makes us begin to think, wow, man, I hadn't thought about it that way. You start to seem like you're the authority on the character. But that comes, I think, from a combination of like doing your work, thinking before you act, so you can act before you think. Doing that work at home of really getting clear on who this person is and what's the story we're telling, so that when you're up here, you can let that go and you can be a bit mischievous with it. That it's just there. And when you're being mischievous too, the other quality that I see in actors who bring that sense of mischievousness into their work is that they they're not afraid to really play with the other actor, to kind of screw with them a bit, to really bounce off of them, to get under their skin. Does that make sense? You can, I'm sure you've all had this experience, right? You can feel the difference when you're a reader between when you are being acted at versus when you're being talked to, or when it feels like the other actor is really trying to get under your skin. I want you to have fun. I want you to be mischievous. I want you to get playful with it. I want you to let go of trying to get it right. I want you to let go of the result and just enjoy being in the moment, in the process of doing the scene. What can you bring to the table? When a breakthrough happens or when a transformation happens, it can happen in an instant. Yeah. It's like you're hearing the same thing, over and over again, you're even doing the same thing over and over again, and then all of a sudden something clicks, and in an instant, everything changes. Your whole approach changes. The way you see things completely changes. It's not always a gradual thing. It's weird because what's gradual is you just hearing it over and over again. But then when the breakthrough happens, it can happen instantaneously. When a real transformation happens, it's usually permanent. Does that make sense? Like, it just completely shifts. You just can't see it the same way again. And if you can't see it the same way again, you're just not going to do things the same way again. I was doing a scene with another actor in a masterclass with this well-known actor who was teaching, and I had done the scene to death, and the teacher was working with the other student, and all of a sudden she produced this sort of breakthrough in the other student, and the other actress began to cry. And it made total sense for the scene. She just hadn't cried in that moment before, but all of a sudden she was crying. And it got to my next line, and I said my next line exactly the same way that I'd said it the 50 other times that we'd done the scene. And I heard this teacher at the back of the theater just go, "No!" And she came running down onto the stage, and she was like, "No!" And she said, "What are you doing?" She said, "Look at her. Becky is crying. She's crying. What do you need to do? What do you need to say? How do you need to say that line in order to make Becky feel better?" And I said my line again in such a way as to make my scene partner Becky feel better. And the teacher said, "Yes, thank you. Thank you." And she ran back up to the back of the theater again. And I literally remember having this revelation on stage as like a 20-something-year-old actor, that I literally was like, it's that simple. That's all you have to do. Of course, in the scene, we were on a date. And if I was on a date and my date burst into tears and started crying, I'd probably want to make my date feel better. You just have to listen and react the way you would in life if you were in this situation and it was happening to you now. And that was honestly one of those, like, can't see it the same way again. It was so simple. It was so silly. Of course I've heard that a million times before. But it was just in that moment, having it pointed out in that way, that became like this kind of permanent shift for me. That, why am I overcomplicating it? Why am I acting at her? Because I've got some idea in my head about how that line should sound. Because what was happening was I was conforming myself to my idea of how the line should sound, rather than letting the line conform itself to the moment. Tonight, I want you to swing for the fences on your first take. Swing for the fences and see what happens. We can always rein it in. We can always, we can adjust it. We can pull it back. We can fix it if it needs fixing. But I want you to really take some risks, take some chances. You've got nothing to lose. Nobody has to see this tape. You don't need to send it to anybody. And swing for the fences doesn't mean it has to be crazy. It could be completely conversational, and that could be swinging for the fences. It could be really intimate. It could be incredibly still, and that would be swinging for the fences. But take a chance and have some fun.